think that actually challenged the African hypothesis to the degree where, like, this word should be not used as black anymore at all, as this absolute black, that we use it with our subjective understanding against our social way we have been engineered to understand the word. And so these are some of the sources. Zeno, have you heard of Zeno at all?
Yes.
He's one of my favorite philosophers. I told you before, I promote Stoicism. This man right here, he's the founder of my school, Stoic philosophy. So he's one of the leader, the teacher, the first of all the Stoics, Zeno. So going with Zeno, I want to tell you a little bit about him first of all, because people are saying that he was an Egyptian, as if it was written in history that he was an Egyptian or something like that, because there are no sources. And there are only two sources of the nationality of Zeno, and they are either Greek and Phoenician, to be honest. And I'm just going to go here, and I'm sorry I'm using Wikipedia, but with Wikipedia, guys, I want everyone to know that I do the source check before I present what I'm going to present. So I've done the source checks, and there are no issues with this particular thing that I'm about to show you at the moment. So we know that Zeno was born around the 330 BCs, okay, and he came from Cyprus. Cyprus today is still a Greek island that speaks the Greek language. I'm not sure if you know that, Garfield. But in those times, even though it had a big Greek colonies in there from Mycenaean times, there was even Phoenician colonies in there. So the question, could he have been of Phoenician stock, is also very interesting. Absolutely. His ancestry is disputed between Phoenician and Greek. So it's not a question whether this guy was Egyptian. It was either was he a Phoenician or a Greek. And he goes on to say that Sidium contained both Phoenician and Greek inhabitants. While most contemporary and modern historians regard Zeno as a Phoenician, some modern scholars have contested this, arguing for a Greek or a Greco-Phoenician background. The only things that historians know for certainty are that Zeno had a Greek name, a Greek higher education, and that there is no evidence he knew a language other than Greek. His father Mneseus had a name ambiguously meaning both Phoenician, one causing to forget, and in Greek, mindful. His mother and her name are not recorded. So in this information right here, it's very telling that he's either Greek or Phoenician. I like to say that he's Greek. Maybe I'm being biased, but let's go with the latter. Let's call him a Phoenician. That's not a problem at all. Let's just go ahead with that hypothesis for the moment. Now, in this particular passage on top, Garfield, I want you to read. I'm going to read out to you and say that Zeno is described as haggard and dark-skinned, and a dark-skinned person. Can you see that, Garfield?
Yes, I can.
Number 19 is the source for that information. So I was very interested to see. Interesting. I wonder what's going on in this particular translation. I'm not even thinking African at this present moment. I'm thinking Phoenician or Greek and dark skin, and I have no problem with what I'm reading so far at all. But we're going to go in and see what the go is here, because apparently the source is very telling according to some. So in the particular source, we're going to read a particular passage down at the bottom here. I'm trying to find it. Here it is, middle passage. Moreover, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down, he says, moreover, Apollonius of Tyre says he was lean, he was fairly tall, and swarthy. We know what swarthy means. I was interested to see what this swarthy was, what this word that they use for swarthy, and I noticed it's melanchros. It's the actual melanchros, the same way Herodotus uses it. So we know that he's tall. Actually, we actually know that he was a very fast runner as well. He used to do long distance running as well, and he had a master, or one of his teachers. His name was Crates, and Crates used to call him his little Phoenician. I will get to that source. But in this particular verse, we can see that Diogenes Laertius, he calls him a Greek Phoenician. That's why there's a bit of a confusion, first of all. Elniko Phoenikas. So that's why there's a confusion what he was, whether he was a Greek or Phoenician. So that's the information we have. But we know that people did call him the Phoenician, so that's why I'm going to stick with that particular view at this present time. But down the bottom, it says, after that dark-colored word circle, it says, whence he called him an Egyptian vine. Apollodorus called him, he was dark-colored, that thus he called him an Egyptian vine. So he's not calling him an Egyptian, because this is where the confusion is. He's saying, oh, well, he's referencing something to Egypt. This must mean skin color and race. He's definitely African. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that at all. I don't read it like that. What the word that I'm reading, it says melanchros. We know that he called him a Greek and Phoenician. And actually, in this particular passage, I'm going to try to find it for you. Sorry. Okay, the last passage down about, I'm not sure if you can read it, Garfield. Second last line, they say. Can you read that one, Garfield?
They say he was fond of eating green figs and of basking in the sun.
So Diogenes Laertius also tells us that he enjoyed suntanning. How interesting is that? He enjoyed basking in the sun and suntanning himself. Thus someone called him an Egyptian vine, because that Egyptian, the Greeks and Phoenicians, when they get dark in the sun, just like that fisherman, they get that darkness, that melanated skin, just like that Egyptian vine branch. Now you can think the Egyptian vine branch is some type of branch. The word is glimadra. I remember reading it before. So it could be meaning a branch, or does he mean the people of Egypt themselves? He is as dark as the Egyptians themselves. We don't know. You can read that however poetically you want to read that. But we know the guy that enjoys suntans and basking in the sun. And we know that he was an Ellinophonicus. He was some type of Greek Phoenician. And that he was some dark, that this one gentleman, I think it was Apollonius, suggested that, thus someone called him an Egyptian vine branch. So this is my reading of that. And this goes to show that the word melanchros was not just used for Egyptians or Ethiopians, but also for Greeks and Egyptians. So people can get this particular passage and do whatever they want to do with it, but they can't read a sub-Saharan African in here, that the Egyptians are sub-Saharan African. Not at all. It's not there. I think this is debunked as well. Like, I think all of them are debunked so far, but I really want to hear the responses I get from people, because I will get more sources and I will bring them to the table. Because unlike most scholars who speak Greek or write Greek, but their language is not Greek, they're like birds who are trying to fly without wings. I'm not trying to be very patriarchal here, but I've got the wings and I know how to use the tools in the Greek language to a certain degree that I think I could actually do better than some scholars. I'm not going to say all. But for someone to grab something, someone who doesn't speak Greek, and just grabs one quote, 2 lines, without reading anything in context, without understanding and reading people's books, and reading what Diogenes Laertius has to say through his complete works, and just ripping off and cherry picking one verse, is very, very poorly executed. And it goes to show how people are not being vigorous enough in trying to find the truth, and they're just cherry picking particular words to try to force their agenda. So as a Greek, melanchros could be used as me. I could be melanchros. I could show you my white skin, and you would see that my hands, I'm white here, but I am melanchros in my face and my neck, but I would get very white in my chest. Does that make sense? That's the way we use it. It's a sun-kissed, dark, honey-skinned sun-drenched, swarthy, dark. It's not that absolute black. We understood because we went through the Greek before, because it can use dark, darker, and darkest. We showed you how in context it can only be used like this. We showed how black is not a good substitute for this word because you can't say things like black, green, and so on. And this right here is showing you that it can be used for Greeks or Cypriots, if you want to call them, Phoenicians. But yeah, and that's all I have to say for this particular passage, Garfield. So can we say that this has been absolutely challenged, or you still think we're going to get a bit of...
And I'm sure you have more examples, especially with, I think a lot of this has to do with Black Athena, man. So your next time you come on, we're going to have to go through Black Athena and look at the rebuttals for a lot of the claim. Because that's where it comes from. A lot of it comes from.
It's interesting enough. Are they claiming that the Phoenicians are black as well? Is that right, Garfield?
They run around and say, everybody's black, bro. Everybody's black. Everybody's black.
Why did it? Well, I'm just interested to know why this started. Why that this kind of phenomenon is starting amongst people like this?
It started because of systematic racism. You know, everything we were taught that other people did it and that blacks didn't do anything. So in the 1800s, you started seeing a lot of people pushing that we were Ethiopians or Egyptians and so forth, and then you had Christians who were saying that we're the Israelites in the Bible. So this is what happened when you're kidnapped. When you're kidnapped from one country and brought to a next, you're searching for an identity. So now you have all these things pop up.
You know what? I agree with what you're saying. And just to throw something from my perspective, which may or may not have anything to say at all on this particular point, but when you think about the out of Africa theory, you know that theory?
Yes.
When we hear this theory, it's just some made up words that we've painted and we've put it as a hypothesis out in the world, and people hear it and it becomes something that's taught sometimes in classes out of Africa. Some people that would be in this African community, they would get a sense of like grandeur and a sense of like prestige. Look at us, the first amongst all. We were the ones, and you could see how this would evolve to later on being kind of appropriated. I think that has something to do with it, to be honest. I actually think it might have been somewhere around the same time. It might have even been happening, you know. But at the same time, when I think a lot of people from the African American community actually think they were just plucked out of the jungle. I actually think they believe that they were just plucked out of the jungle without a culture, and became lost in America. And later on, they felt like they need to kind of grasp onto and make some type of culture history for themselves. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm not, and I'm not sure if it has any truth in what I'm saying. I'm just trying to understand this phenomenon. Maybe it's just the same pagan cult that's being revived everywhere in the world. In Greece today, we have people who are called Hellenes that don't use the term Greek because Greek denotes a Christian, Orthodox Greek. But a Hellene, that means someone who worships and honors the ancestral gods. And some Hellenics are trying to revive this Hellenic culture in Greece. And this is done in by the Celts as well, in like the Vikings kind of do it in kind of those areas up there. Like I'm noticing people are kind of going and starting their own neo-pagan kind of cults everywhere, this kind of revival. And I think this phenomenon that's happening in the African community amongst, hey, we Africans, we are the Greeks, we are the Phoenicians, we are the Egyptians, we are the Hebrews. I just think this is a phenomenon just like that's happening in the world, which is interesting just to see as a psychological thing, to be honest.
Yeah.
So sorry for going on, completely off the context here.
Good. Let's get some more going. Who is the next scholar you wanted to touch on?
We can edit that later. Okay, so we spoke on Zeno, and we've seen that melanchros can be used for Greeks and Phoenicians, interestingly enough. Okay, the next one we have Philostratus, the life of Apollonius of Tyana. Have you read this source?
I'm aware of it. I read some of it years ago.
Yeah, this is why I think this kind of debunks the whole hypothesis here that the Black African people are doing. And this is what I want to say about that, Garfield. And I kind of want to read it in context. And I know we're reading a lot of material here, but it's the only way to do it. I just don't want to read you one small part. So I'm going to start from the top, but the passage that we want to get to is on the bottom. But let's read it in context. For when he arrived at the confines of Ethiopia and Egypt, at the name of the place is Siculus. Now, Garfield, I want to show you where this place is because I want to show you where Apollonius and where Philostratus is telling us Apollonius is. Now, that's the map on the left-hand side, and I've kind of just zoomed in on the right-hand side. And he's telling us he's at the confines of Egypt, where Egypt meets Ethiopia. That's where he is. And this line shows us perfectly where the confines are. If you can see him on this map. And we have the Dodecacroanus, and on top of that we have the Sacra Siculus. That Sacra Siculus, that is where Apollonius is, at Siculus. That Sacra just means holy. The word is Ira Siculus in Greek. Ero means holy. The Latin derivative is sacra, sacred. So he's at Siculus, and you can see him. And then the next passage, he just shows it's a region. Pliny's telling us this by memory. It's a region near the Dodecacroanus. That's a very difficult word. Dodecas Konas. Dodecas means 12. The Choas, I'm thinking that word comes from also that word for Choas. I would like to check that word. It's not. It would be a word that's associated with some type of people in that particular region. But you can see that region where it is on the map. The Dodecacroanus region, Garfield.
Yeah, I seen it. Mm-hmm.
And then on top, it's Sacra Siculus. That's where he is. Is that confines right there?
Right there, near the border. Mm-hmm.
So right there in that corner, that's where he is. And the verse continues. So that's where he is right now. He's at that confines. And he came across a quantity of uncoined gold and linen, and elephant, and various roots, and myrrh and spices, which are all lying without anyone to watch them at a crossways. I will explain the meaning of this. For the same custom still survives among ourselves. It was a market place to which the Ethiopians bring all their products of their country. So the Ethiopians bring all their products to this place in the confines, and the Egyptians in their turn take them all away and bring to the same spot their own wares of equal value. So bartering what they have got for what they have not. So they're at this place, at this marketplace, at this kind of like, and they're kind of bartering, and the people are bringing stock, and people are they're kind of selling stuff and getting that's how they're bartering back then, and they're doing it between the Ethiopians and the Egyptians. Now this is what this paragraph says, and I want people to understand it very, very carefully. Now the inhabitants of these marshes are not yet fully black, but are half-breeds. So the people at this place at the confines between Ethiopia and Egypt, they are not fully black, but they are half-breeds. Okay? They are half-breeds. For they are partly not so black as the Ethiopians. So these people who are living in the confines, they're not as black as the Ethiopians, yet they are partly more so than the Egyptians. So it looks like when we look at the southern parts, it looks like they're not as dark as those Ethiopians who dwell under the confines of Egypt, but they're not as light as the Egyptians either. They're a middle tone between these extremes. Are you following that, Garfield? Did I represent that properly?
I am. Yes, I am. It's basically saying now the inhabitants of the marshes are not yet fully black, but are half-breeds in matter of color. But they are partly not so black as the Ethiopians, and partly more so than the Egyptians. Yeah, that's clear.
That's very clear. So we know that the Ethiopians are not as dark as the Egyptians, according to this passage. Would that be a reasonable thing to say, Garfield?
Yes, very reasonable. And by the way, Philostratus was writing in what, the 3rd century, right? Was it or the 11th century? When was he writing? Let me look it up real quickly.
He was writing in the second or 3rd century AD. Bugger. You know what? I don't even have it here. I'm sorry, but definitely 2nd, 3rd century. Interestingly enough, the tradition is Apollonius. Even though it was written in the 2nd, 3rd century, Apollonius was claimed to be born around the 1st century.
170.
Oh, there you go. Even a little bit.
247. So he wrote this in the 3rd century, actually. 3rd century.
Yeah.
The Common Era.
Yeah, that's right. Interesting enough. So
again, the pushback you're gonna get is that this is late, and this was during the time of what you call it. But it's funny that this type of source is saying that they look mixed. They look, they're not dark as the Ethiopians, and they're not as dark. They're a little bit darker than what the average Egyptian looked like. So they're saying basically Egyptians normally look a certain way, and they're separating them from the Ethiopians.
Absolutely, that's exactly how I read it. This is why I'm telling people these next quotes that you're going to get from me. These kind of debunk, because I wasn't looking at quotes that they're cherry picking. I'm trying to find quotes that are going against with what they're saying, and this is what I'm presenting here. I did it with Zeno. I think I did it with all of them, but these next couple ones are going to be really very telling. So, you've expressed it more eloquently than me, Garfield. It's 1 o'clock here in Sydney in the morning. So sorry if I'm kind of sounding a little bit tired.
Yeah,
but
that's fine.
Let's keep on going. So you said it better than me, and that's what I took from it as well. So we're on the same page with that one. The next one I want to read is Arrian of Nicomedia. Do you know which one I'm going to hear, Garfield, or you ever heard this particular?
No, I'm not familiar with this one.
This is good. I'm glad I'm bringing something new to the table, because I've been asking this for so long now, and unfortunately, you've been telling me that you knew all these prior to me showing you. So I'm glad I'm going somewhere where you haven't been before. So. Okay, so this guy's roughly writing around the same time as Philostratus, 146 to 160 AD, 86 to 89. So he's in that period, okay? Now, you're telling me that these people are going to say, well, he's writing too late, geez. By that time, the Greeks and Romans had already kind of taken over the native Egyptians, who were like thousands and millions amongst a couple of little colonies of Egyptians and Greeks living there. Definitely the Egyptians were the majority amongst the people of Greeks and the Romans who were living there, and everyone else. But regardless of this, I want to try to get this text. I want to try to go back in time, because even though Arrian himself was in 146 or 86 AD, he wrote his book on the Indica. It's a work that's pertaining basically a story of India, you know what I mean? And the history of India, a better way to store it. And in his book, he talks about the voyage of Nearchus. Nearchus was he did a voyage in the Persian Gulf. The first part of the Indica was based largely on the work of the same name of Megasthenes. The second part based on the journal written by Nearchus. So Arrian's telling us right now that he's getting his information not from himself and from his time, but he's getting his information from Megasthenes. So we need to find where is he getting his information from, and who is Megasthenes. So Megasthenes lived at 350-290 BC. So we're talking pre-Hellenistic period. So he was someone that actually, by memory, joined the repertoire with Alexander the Great, and he went all the way to India with Alexander. Alexander the Great took a bunch of philosophers with him and historians. He brought a lot of botanists and many other type of scientists to kind of exchange information and bring stuff back and see all these wonders and these new exotic places they're going to, and trying to write all these things down that they're finding so they can take them back to Greece and kind of expand, because that's what Greece wanted to do. They kind of want to bring all this information and not just let it sit there and stagnate, but progress and evolve and keep going forward. But disregard all that. So Megasthenes was a Greek historian, a diplomat, an ethnographer, and explorer in the Hellenistic period. He described India in his work Indica, which is now lost, but has been partially reconstructed by fragments found in later authors like Arrian that quoted his work. Megasthenes was the first person from the Western world to leave a written description on India. Okay, so I want to let people know that we're going back to 350s BC. So we're talking about pre-Hellenistic world, or at the time when just world was just being conquered by Alexander the Great. That's the period of time we're talking about. So the Romans are not there yet. The Greeks haven't established colonies all through the East and Africa yet. So I'm trying my best to push this text back logically using the sources that we're about to use at this moment. And the source that we're getting from Arrian, that is taken from Megasthenes and Niarchos, is this particular one. Arrian Indica 6:9. The appearance of the inhabitants is also not different in India and Ethiopia. The southern Indians are rather more like the Ethiopians, as they are black to look on, and their hair is black. Only they are not so snub-nosed or woolly hair like the Ethiopians. But the northern Indians are most like the Egyptians physically. So again, in this particular quote, what we found here, he's telling us that we know today that the southern Indians are much darker, if I can say much black or much blacker. No, that doesn't make sense. Are much darker than the Pakistanis, the northern Indians. The northern Indians are much more lighter looking, than more lighter honey skinned, if I can use that term. And what he's portraying is he's telling us that, hey, the North Indians look like the Egyptians, but these southern Indians, well, they look like the Ethiopians in color. Have I presented that properly, or can you please articulate that a little bit better for me, Garfield?
Basically, they're saying that the northern Indians, and actually when we say India, we're literally talking about India. We're not talking where Columbus called India. We're talking about literally where India is. They had people who were dark skinned, extremely dark, like the Ethiopians. The people in the north were pretty much lighter skinned. They had different features, facial features, physically.
Absolutely. And just that, yep. No, please finish off, Garfield.
No, I'm done. That's pretty much what it is.
Yeah, and absolutely. And Indians are very big country. It's a big chunk of that east part there that extends all the way down to the south, down to like Australia kind of thing. Like it's very, very southern. But as it comes down, just like Africa comes down, the people get darker there. If you wrap a whole band around the world, those regions, those people are much more melanchros, if I can use the term, are much more melanated or much more black. Can I use that term? Because everyone seems to like that term. But again, I just want to finish reading this particular passage because this should not be a discussion after this particular passage. I want to read the passage again. The appearance of the inhabitants is also not very different in India and Ethiopia. The southern are rather more like the Ethiopians, as they are black to look on, and their hair is black. Only they are not so snub-nosed or woolly-haired like the Ethiopians. But the northern Indians are most like the Egyptians physically. This is even true today in India. The southerners are more darker than the northern ones, the ones that are closer to Europe and Persia and whatnot. That's also true of Africa today, Garfield. And if that's both true today, it makes no difference. It would have been the same 2,500 years ago, 3,000 years ago. Absolutely. Yeah. This is just my opinion. If you want to critique that particular part, I can just say that's my speculation of my own opinion, but that's fine. I'm looking at this through kind of logically, and I'm trying to reason with you guys. I'm trying to actually find this African connection, guys, but I'm not seeing it. The more I'm reading, the more disappointed I'm getting. and it actually feels like, we're just wasting our time here. We're not actually kind of focusing on stuff that's more kind of enlightening. But it's good. It's a bit of entertainment, and we're just going to keep on going. So Arrian, Indica 6-9, please look it on. Do you want me to keep? Do you want to say anything about this verse or this particular source?
One thing I want to add on is, like, when you think about phenotypes, the Greeks were specifically very descriptive in this quote, because they do say they have snub-nosed or woolly-haired, as they don't have that like the Ethiopians.
Can I just? Yeah, I don't want to stop your train of thought, but you said something that important that I wanted to mention. Do you see how Arrian has to go and explain what he means by melanchroas?
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that, he needs to kind of explain to you, hey, well, you're not going to understand what I mean by melanchros, because, hey, melanchros is a spectrum. So I'm going to have to kind of use some more descriptive words to get the Greek reader to understand what darkness I'm talking about. If it was a word like black, we wouldn't have to use that extra descriptive words, because black means black in our absolute language today. But melanchros is that spectrum. So therefore, Arrian has to do this extra technical work. Well, look, it's not that black like the Ethiopians, but it's more like this Indian. You know what I'm getting at, Garfield. So that's a very interesting point that you made, and I kind of wanted to show that authors had to kind of explain this word sometimes to get the reader to understand what spectrum of darkness they're talking. And he goes on to say, hey, the spectrum of darkness I'm talking about is that these southern Indians are more like the Ethiopians because they're black to look on, and their hair is black, only they are not so snub-nosed. So they don't have that snub-nosed or woolly head or curly hair, because southern Indians have more straight hair and like more of an alpine nose. I forgot that particular feature nose that it is, but
the aquiline nose, or
aquiline nose, I think. Yeah, it's more of some type of nose like that. And he goes on to say that the woolly head as the Ethiopians, and the northern Indians are most like the Egyptians physically. So these northern Indians in the northern realm were Persians. These people over there on that side, well, these people are much lighter in color, and they are. He's describing them physically like the Egyptians. And I would look at Pakistanis today and northern Indians, and I could relate to the same type of hue of color that is in Egypt today with those Semitic, Arab, Levantine people that are kind of in that majority in that area today, if that makes sense.
Question: the woolly hair, are they using the term olotros right here for woolly hair?
You're going to shoot me because I haven't got the Greek here. I haven't got the Greek here, unfortunately. I think I did read the Greek, and it did say eulotriches. Usually, yeah. Look, I'm going to have to check that. I don't want to be too hard on that particular word, because I might say something that I might be wrong. So I want to leave a bit of a question mark, but I would say it is. Okay.
Yeah, because in other translations it says they have not the nose so flat, nor the hair so curly, while the Indians who live further to the north are in person like the Egyptians.
I would definitely say they're using it's definitely ulotriches. It looks like they're still kind of substituting the word for curly and woolly. Yeah, my take on it. Alrighty, so the next verse I got for you is Strabo.
Okay, Strabo.
A
lot of people Strabo. They run from Strabo.
Yeah, look, this verse I got for Strabo is very similar to the one I got before. Again, I want to push back time again. I don't want to say that straight. We're talking about a text that was written in 63 and 24 AD. And I want to remind people that the text we just written by Arrian, we're talking about a time pre-Hellenistic times, or during the start of the Hellenistic time. So it wasn't yet fully, Romanized by that time, if that makes sense. We're still dealing with a time that, Persia just had their satrapy there and whatnot. And and the Persians really didn't kind of like, they didn't do what the Greeks did. They kind of sent an elite there. They sent a satrapy there to kind of govern the area, but they really didn't do a population exchange or anything like that, where a huge portion of the population went there and Persianized everything. They kind of let the Egyptians do their own kind of thing, but not in regards to religion, but in regards to their culture and language. But in regards to Strabo, Artemidorus over here is a Greek geography. He's gotten his information. Strabo's gotten his information from this Artemidorus, and he also uses sources from Polybius to describe other parts and other areas. He describes huge portions of the known world, and Strabo is one of my favorite authors as well. And I get so much information. I've got one of his books, and I really would urge people to read his works. So what I want people to understand here is that he's describing information in the middle there where you see India and the book XV. India and Persia, book XV, were described according to information given by the historians of the campaigns of Alexander the Great. So again, we're getting information from people that went and marched on and went all the way to India with Alexander the Great. All these historians that went there, they're describing what they're seeing. And what they're seeing is what Strabo is telling us, that he's reporting in his geography, that he's telling us that he's been given it from these authors. And it's very similar to the passage we read before. Maybe it's coming from a common source, maybe not, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it anyways. As for the people of India, those in the south are like the Ethiopians in color, although they are like the rest in respect to countenance and hair. For on account of the humidity of the air, hair does not curl, whereas those in the north are like the Egyptians. Again, he's telling us that the northern Egyptians, the ones closer to Europe, the ones that are higher up, they're like the Egyptians. I actually bet, Garfield, they were like those people in the Caucasus as well. Just my little take, and maybe we'll do that for the Black Athena project. But right now, he's telling us that the people in the north are like the Egyptians. They're light. They are melanchro, but not like the people in the south. Those people are like the Ethiopians in color. That darkness. So again, there is no information here telling me that the black Africans are the Egyptians. Actually, the opposite. It's telling us something completely else, guys. So Strabo, Geography 15.1.13, go look it up and enjoy. Because right now, I think I've debunked and challenged this whole hypothesis that the ancient Egyptians were not the Ethiops, were not the African, sub-Saharan African type. And no, the Greeks did not think they were at all. And it doesn't appear in their writings. Strabo is telling us something that's completely opposite to that. So there we go, Garfield. We've got another source, but how are you feeling at this moment?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I was waiting for you to. There's another source. I don't know if you're going to bring it up with Herodotus, saying that the native Egyptians, comparing that the Dorians, the Greeks were true-born Egyptians. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting, actually. Absolutely.
That's
something we need to discuss that in the next one.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of want to leave a little bit of something for people to take just from that. And there are so many more other quotes. The same author tells us that the Greeks, Diodorus Siculus also tells us that the Greeks built cities in Egypt before the Egyptians themselves. He's telling us stories that contradict each other, but he doesn't care. He's telling you anyways. So yes, he's probably right. I'm not sure if Strabo said this or Diodorus Siculus says this. I have to find the sources and look through them. I've got them. I've done an article on a Black Athena, but I would like to make a bigger project on it with you, Garfield. But so there's contradictory statements that we could read in these sources that contradict each other, but yet we hear about them and they say them. And we should look at them and read them in context, because I think people will get a different picture.
Yeah,
And
saying that the Greeks built the cities in Egypt, and like Egypt comes from Egyptos, and Egyptos ran away from Greece to Egypt, or I don't remember how the story goes, but there's so much they say.
Look, I don't want to kind of I'll go a bit of a rant here, but the understanding in Greek mythology, people kind of understand, they take mythology as something that's kind of maybe allegories and stuff, but in the Greek sense, mythos had some truer sense and truer truth to it that had to be digested and be read in a way for you to understand. There was a time before Alexander and the Greeks who came to Egypt. There was a time before this that the Greeks had come and established cities in Egypt, and we know this because we have evidence from the Egyptians themselves, saying that these people came from Crete and came from north, from the top, where Greece and all these Greeks and Pelasgians and all these tribes that are scattered through the Mediterranean. Greece is not just Greece proper. The Greeks were like frogs in a pond that were scattered through the Mediterranean, unlike the Egyptians. If the Egyptians controlled the world, their culture and civilization would be scattered around the Mediterranean. We see the opposite. We see Greek culture and Greek architecture all over the Mediterranean, from France, Spain, Portugal, France, Libya, Egypt, the Levant. If it was true for the Egyptians, you would see their culture in those lands, but you don't. We see the opposite. We see the Greeks. And I'm not trying to be biased. I might be coming out biased, but we'll leave that discussion for the next project, because there are so many more things that we could say about this. We could sit here for 6 hours and making discussion about that.
All right.
But yeah, very interesting stuff. Absolutely.
All right. So this source here, what is this one now? From Diodorus Siculus.
Yeah. So you've probably heard this one before. Maybe you haven't, Garfield, but they say also that the Egyptians are colonists sent out by the Ethiopians. Brackets, we're talking about, blacks, Africans. Osiris having been the leader of the colony, Diodorus Siculus. Well, I read this and I remember the YouTuber, very funny guy. I actually enjoyed watching his video. He kind of had me in stitches, the whole thing. But he said this is slam dunk. This one here is slam dunk. Like, you can't get better than this. Here it is. And for him, this particular passage said it all. And it was just interesting when I read everything in context. And again, I really want people to read things. Don't just cherry pick something out of the Bible or out of Diodorus and say, oh, look what it says here. Because apologists do that all the time. And we know that they do it and they get things wrong because they're cherry picking. So people are cherry picking this verse and saying, but if you read the whole context, maybe read his preface. What is he saying at the outset before he begins his whole speech? But his whole histories. But yeah, so we definitely want to get into this. And if you don't mind, Garfield, because I think this particular article and this particular thing that we're going to speak on in regards to this verse, we're actually going to sit and read Diodorus for a bit and big chunks of his stuff. It might take about 10 minutes. I really want you to get a big context and understand. Then when we get to the passage, I think everyone will have a much better understanding on what Diodorus was doing. But before we do that, do you mind if I have another 5-minute break, Garfield?
No problem, man. We could take a break right now. All right. We'll be right back, family. Yes, family, as we resume and continue this excellent presentation / interview / dialogue / back and forth, whatever we call it. So to my brother all the way in Australia, again, my audience appreciates you taking out the time. It's like 1:30 in Australia right now in the morning, and you're taking the time out to present this to the community. All right, so we're moving on from Diodorus Siculus. No, we're not. Actually, we're going to read out the passage and look at it in context of what they're talking about. And then we're going to have a dialogue.
Absolutely. Do you want to go ahead and read the passage before we continue?
They say also that the Egyptians are colonists sent out by the Ethiopians. In brackets, he has Nubians, Black Africans, Osiris having been the leader of the colony. Diodorus Siculus.
All right, perfect. So, Garfield, before I begin, I need to use. I copied and pasted a whole chunk of the Diodorus works, book 1, 2, and 3, in a Word document. How would I share that?
You would come down and press. So let me
Present.
pause. Let me pause the show for a second. Let me pause for one. Yeah, we're right back, and there you go. The source is on the page, so we good to go. There you go, my brother. Floor is yours.
Fantastic. So we just read a passage. What's basically telling us that the Ethiopians, it's being portrayed as Diodorus is saying. Diodorus himself is saying, it's being portrayed that Diodorus is saying that the Ethiopians, that the Egyptians are Ethiopian colonists, and therefore that the Egyptians are Ethiopians. Is that what you understand from that passage, Garfield?
Yes, that's what I understand from it. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's a direct quote. I mean, he's putting it out there like, hey, look, this is what they're saying. So let's get the context. Go ahead.
Okay, so perfect. So now we're going to go ahead and get a bit of context here. And I've just put the first book of Diodorus. And guys, I'm telling everyone once again, I urge everybody to go and read Diodorus because it's beautiful to read everything that he says. There are so much things that we can go in here and like explore and say and look at. It's never ending. So really go do yourselves a favor, go grab yourselves a copy and read it. So in this big chunk, we're reading a bunch of information. And he goes on to say that we have begun our history with the legends of both Greeks and barbarians. Barbarians is used for people, non-Greeks. So barbarians would mean someone who is not Greek. A barbarian would be a non-Greek person. So everyone would be barbarian who does not speak Greek for the Greeks, if that makes sense. So basically, he's telling us that he's going to bring in his history with the legends from the Greeks and the barbarians, from other people, like the Egyptians. They'll be considered barbarians, or the Ethiopians. They'll be considered barbarians, and they are called as such. So to say that the Ethiopians and the Egyptians and Greeks are all the same people, like some people say, it's a bit of a rant again, but it doesn't make sense. But in this particular passage, we go on to further read. Now the first men, since none of the things useful for life had yet been discovered, led a wretched existence, having no clothing to cover them, knowing not the use of dwelling and fire, and also being totally ignorant of uncultivated food. So he's giving us this bit of a Genesis story that the first people really lived in like a wretched existence, no clothes, like Stone Age people. Okay, he's giving us a bit of a history here about how he thinks early civilizations happen. Now he goes on to say, but on number 10, if we look at number 10 for a second, and as regards to the origin of men and their earliest manner of life, we shall be satisfied with what has been said, since we would keep due proportion in our account. But as regards all events which we have been handed down to memory and took place in the known regions of the inhabited world, we shall now undertake to give a full account of them. Now, as to who were the first kings, we are in no position to speak on our own authority, nor do we assent to those historians who profess to know. So Diodorus is saying that, hey, let's be honest, guys, for the first kings, who the first people were, the Egyptians, the Greeks, whoever, the Phrygians, the Sumerians, whatever. He's actually saying, who knows? No one knows. And anyone who professes to know, for it is impossible to discover. So he's saying that it's impossible to know. So he's basically saying in context here, hey, for the earliest people, so things that we're fighting about today, who were the first, Diodorus is saying to us, hey, guys, this is unknowable. And we're just kind of like speculating and just kind of like, and whatnot. But if we keep reading here, he goes on to say that, but if a man should concede even this last point, it still seems evident that the writers of history are a class of quite recent appearance. So people that are writing history are just recent of mankind. again, with respect to the antiquity of human race, not only do Greeks put forth their claims, so not only do the Greeks put forth in their claims that they have the oldest of antiquity in regards to human race, but also many barbarians claim as well, all holding that it is they who were autochthonous, that word is indigenous, and the first of all men to discover all things which are of use in life, and that it is the events in their own history which were the earliest to have been held worthy of record. So far as we concede, however, we shall not make an attempt to determine with precision the antiquity of each nation, or what is the race whose nations are prior to point of time to the rest of, by how many years, but we shall record summarily, keeping due proportion in our accounts, what each nation has to say concerning its antiquity, and the early events in its history. So right now, Diodorus is telling us that he's going to go out and record with due proportion in account what each nation has to say concerning their own histories, concerning their own elements. So he's going to go to the Ethiopians. He's going to now go to the Babylonians. He's going to go to the Assyrians. He's going to go to the Greeks, and he's going to write down what has these people got to say about their nation and their antiquity, and he's going to write it down for us. Okay, so before I continue, I'm sorry that I'm not speaking eloquently, and I'm trying to. It's 1:30, and I'm trying my best to do this. But do we have a bit of an understanding what's happening here so much in context so far, Garfield?
Yes, he's basically telling us all that we don't know exactly how man came about, but all these cultures that write about it, they always found what they write about themselves worthy, and pretty much not other cultures. So now he's on his way to break down like each culture he's writing about.
Beautiful.
X, Y, and Z. All right, go ahead.
And you know what the beautiful thing is it's gonna be? These stories are gonna be so contradictory to each other. He doesn't try to mesh them together to try to make sense of them. He's just telling you what the people are telling him, and he's gonna give them to us. Does that make sense?
He's the greatest. He's one of the best, man. He's one of the best. All right,
hey,
man. Bro, you got it.
Okay. Now the Egyptians have an account like this. When in the beginning the universe came into being, man first came into existence in Egypt, both because of the favorable climate of the land and because of the nature of the Nile. So the Egyptians are saying like, hey, the Genesis for us, we were the first indigenous people. We were born out of Egypt, you know what I mean, out of the Nile. It keeps on going. There's so much beautiful words he keeps on saying, but I'm skipping things. We're trying to like do everything in a nutshell. I wish I could spend hours reading this to you guys. Of Osiris, they say that being of beneficent turn of mind and eager of glory, he gathered together a great army with an intention of visiting all the inhabited earth, teaching the race of men how to cultivate the vine and sow wheat and barley. While he was in Ethiopia, their account continues, the Satar people were brought to him. So he's in Ethiopia now. In Ethiopia, he instructed the inhabitants in agriculture and founded some notable cities, and then left behind him men to govern the country and collect their tribute. Now, the Egyptians say also that the events, a great number of colonies were spread from Egypt all over the inhabited world to Babylon. Instances colonists were led by Belus. So before I continue, number 6 and the one above, we're saying that the Egyptians who were born of Egypt, they actually went down and they conquered Ethiopia and taught these people agriculture, not the Ethiopians. It was in their story, according to the Egyptians in their stories, no, they were the oldest and the most supreme, who was held of the son of Poseidon and Libya, and after establishing himself on the Euphrates, and he pointed, so he's going everywhere. The Egyptians are colonizing the Euphrates, they're going to the Chaldeans, the Syrians, the Babylonians, they're in Mesopotamia, exempted from taxation, from every kind of service of state, and the priests of Egypt. And also they make observations of the stars following the example of the Egyptian priests and physicists and astrologers. So yeah, these magi, mate, we gave them all these kind of astrology thing. Yeah, they got that from us. They say all those who set forth with Danas likewise from Egypt settled what is practically to the oldest city in Greece, wow, oldest city in Greece, Argos. Geez, that's interesting. Geez, I should put that for our next segment, mate, because I'm going to cherry pick that. Anyways, just reading, keep reading. In general, the Egyptians say that their ancestors sent forth numerous colonies to many parts of the inhabited world, the preeminence of their former kings and their excessive population. But since they often precise proof whatsoever of these statements, and since no historian worthy of credence testifies in their support, we have not thought their accounts mentioned recording. So look, Diodorus just gave us a great account of the Egyptians. We're going to go to book 2 now, but and we're probably going to talk about the Assyrians, I think. But here is a story from Diodorus Siculus, according to what the Egyptians have to say about themselves in antiquity. What do you think about that so far? In regards to that passage, what we understand in looking at this into perspective, and where I'm going to take you now. Garfield, what have you got to say?
I want to say that I'm looking at the Egyptians totally different now. I'm looking like they created the whole out of Africa theory. They created the kingdoms in the Americas, in Asia, all over the world.
Yeah. And look, and he tells us that look, there are things, there are so much things that, hey, like, since no historian worthy of credence, like there's so much things to say more, but like we've got really no much accounts and not much support with what we're going to say. So we're not even going to tell you some of it. Like, so do you know what I mean? But you're just getting all these stuff that the Egyptians are saying, and it might not be true. It might be all propaganda. Look, we're just being speculative now, but it doesn't look like the Egyptians did do all that when we look at archaeology and all that. But here the Egyptians are claiming all this prestige and all this wonder and all this greatness. But at the same time, you need to understand the era in context. We're talking about a Hellenized world. The Greeks are the head honchos now. The Greeks are at the top now. And all these cultures who have kind of like deteriorating, they're kind of making their own culture, saying, hey, you Greeks were once good, but hey, we Egyptians were we were the top dogs one day before you guys. And we're getting stories like the Babyloniaca, the Babylonians. We're getting a story of the Egyptica. We're getting stories of all these people riding around this time, looking at these old exotic cultures and trying to make them, hey, look at this. You guys got everything from us, so on and forth. I'm not going to progress on this because, again, we're going into kind of other territories. But I just wanted to show you that what the Egyptians have to say is going to be contradictory to what the Babylonian and Assyrian account is, and the Greek account, and the actual Ethiopian account, which we're going to read soon. So we didn't do all the accounts here because we haven't got all time, but I think I did one more before we go to the Ethiopians. Okay, and in this present book, we should set forth book 2. I've got the sources, guys. You just have to, everything that I've put on tonight, everything sources in regards to the stuff that I've been reading in the Greek. And in this present book, we shall set forth the events which took place in Asia in the ancient period, beginning with a time when the Assyrians were the dominant power. Okay, so talking about a time of the Assyrians. In the earliest age, then, the kings of Asia were native born. So again, they were native born, indigenous, autochthonous. And in connection with them, no memory is preserved of either a notable deed or personal name. The first to be handed down by tradition to history and memory for us, one who achieved great deeds, is Ninus, king of the Assyrians, and of him we shall now endeavor to give a detailed account. So we're talking about this king of Assyria, Ninus, and we're going to read his exploits. And when now he has collected a notable army, he found an alliance with Arrianus, the king of Arabia. Interesting. I don't know why I highlighted that. Semiramis attained the position of queen, so there's some queen now, some Semiramis. It was Ninus's wife, if I remember. His consort, I'm pretty sure. After this, she visited all Egypt, and after subduing most of Libya, she went also to the oracle of Ammon to inquire of the god regarding her own end. Thereupon her return from these regions, she visited most of Ethiopia, subduing it, as she went down and inspecting the wonders of the land. So in this particular account, what we have, I didn't write all of it, I just highlighted it. It's a much more what I wrote, but we have that the account of the Assyrians is that there's Ninus, and it's Ninus that goes out and he takes over Egypt and subduing most of Libya and he goes all the way to the Ethiopia, and he kind of takes over them and whatnot. So we have a contradictory account that was contradictory to them, and in his story they're making out, again, if you need to read it out, and it's basically making the Assyrians, giving a story of the history of the Assyrians, but also making them also look grandeur, better than everyone else, if that makes sense. It's very common in Greek literature when we read this stuff, especially during this period. But anything you got to say about this text that you understand? I'm just trying to give things in context here.
No, I'm good. I think you're doing a good job. You're breaking it down step by step. You're going through the sources, so you're doing good.
Okay. So now we've read about the story of the Egyptians, and we read a story about the Assyrians. Now, the Assyrians and the Egyptians, your understanding, they're two different nations. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Because if they were the same, he would have put them in the same category, but they're not. He's given them different histories, and he does the same with the Ethiopians. Interestingly enough, so if the Ethiopians were Egyptians in his understanding, maybe he would have done something different. But here is the Egyptian account, and the Egyptian account we hear, and a lot of the stuff that we're going to hear in the Egyptian account, we're also going to read that beautiful stuff that we hear from the Greek historians, from their books of the Ethiopica, who wrote the Ethiopics. We don't have that book anymore. We only have fragments because the Christians burnt everything. But that's another story. We should do another podcast on that as well, so to speak. But anyway, so this particular story now of the Ethiopians, they're going to use a lot of historians with those words from Homer, who presented them as the most beautiful, fair-flung people on earth, who were most pious. All that kind of stuff from the early archaic period is presented in his account, and it's a beautiful one. He makes the Ethiopians to be beautiful because that's what they're trying to do in this particular passage. And we go on to read, as we're reading these about the stories that relate to the Ethiopians, and they say that they were the first to be taught to honor the gods and hold sacrifices and processions and festivals and other rites by which men. So it was these first people. They say also that the Egyptians are colonists sent out by the Ethiopians, Osiris having been the leader of the colony. For speaking generally, what is now Egypt, they maintain was not land but sea when in the beginning of the universe. So they're saying that area over there was just sea back then. You know what I mean? But in Ethiopia, here in this dry land that's desert and desolate, it was land, baby. You know what I mean? It keeps on reading. These are the men, the customs which prevail among the Ethiopians who dwell in the capital, and those who inhabit both the island of Meroe and the land adjoining to Egypt. So he's going to talk about the Ethiopians, but he's talking about the perspective from the land adjoining Egypt and going towards the south now. And he goes on to say how numerous these Ethiopians are in this place. And there's so many different tribes. And here we go. We shall describe these nations who live next to them. For in Ethiopia, which live above Egypt, there dwells beside the river Asia, the nation of the Rizophagi. The Rizophagi, Rizo means root. Phagi means food. These are the root eaters. I would translate that word. Root eaters. They eat roots. For the barbarians here dig up the roots, here we go, of the reeds which grow in the neighboring marshes. So there's people living here, and this is the type of stuff they're doing there. They're living in swamps and eating roots. That's this particular ethos that lives beyond the borders of Egypt and south. It comes to pass when the Ethiopians come out of the marshy lands, they are eaten by these beasts, for they are unable to withstand the might of lions, since they have no help in the form of weapons. Next to the people of the Hilophagi and the Spermatophagi, as they called, the later gather the fruit. It falls the great abundance from the trees in the summer season, and so find the nourishment with the labor. So that we've got people who are kind of like eating seeds and fruits that falls in abundance. The Hilophagi, however, setting out with children and wives in search of food, climb trees and subsist of them, lead tender branches. And this climbing of theirs, even to the topmost branches, they perform so well as a result of their continued practice that a man can scarcely believe that they do indeed. They leap from tree to another like birds and make their way up to the weakest branch. So we've got people who are like climbing trees to get food and stuff like that. The next part of the country of the Ethiopians, another tribe. So these are the tribes of all the Ethiopians. Egypt, the Ethiopians say in this particular passage, the one that we read above, that in their story, not in mankind's story, that they also colonized Egypt, but so did everyone else. Everyone else said the same thing. But when we look at what the Ethiopians are, when we're going south and south and south, we're coming to like tribes and clans. And what we're looking at is a civilization and a culture that's more different to what we would consider culture. And I'll go on to read. And I'm not being derogatory and I'm going to read it, but we're trying to read everything in context. So it's important that we read this. Far distant from this country towards the parts of the west are Ethiopians known as elephant hunters. So now we know that there are people that they still do it today. But some of the natives who dwell near the hunt elephants without exposing themselves to dangers. Keep going. A short distance from this tribe, on the edge of the desert, dwell the Archidofagi, men who are smaller than the rest, lean of body, and exceeding dark. So these people are exceeding dark. For among them, melanchros. And in season strong west and south, multitudes beyond the locus of great and unusual size and wings of ugly, dirty color. Accordingly, the food of these people at the moment and thereafter consists of these animals. They possess herds, nor do they live near the sea, nor do they have any hand of other resources, and light in body and very swift of foot. And they are also altogether short-lived, the oldest among not exceeding 40 years of age. Again, the borders of the parts of the south are inhabited by men who the Greeks call Simaphagi, who are known in the language of the barbarians who live in them. They wear great beards and maintain packs of savage dogs which serve to meet the needs of their life. So these people live with some type of dog, some type of hyena that kind of helps get them their food because that's how they've culturated. The most distant of these tribes, south, indeed, the forms of men live to the south, have indeed the forms of men, but their life is that of beasts. However, it remains for us to discuss two people, the Ethiopians and the Troglodytes. But about the Ethiopians, we have written in order the connections, and we shall now speak the Troglodytes. The Troglodytes are these cave dwellers who lived in Ethiopia, but they lived in nomadic caves sporadically in Ethiopia. They live like a nomadic way of life, just like this particular quote says. And they are all naked as to their bodies, except for loincloths, which they cover with skins. Moreover, the Troglodytes are circumcised like the Egyptians, with the exception of those who, because of what they have experienced, are called Golobi. For these alone are all live inside the straits, have an infancy part of it completely off with the razor, which among other people merely suffers circumcision. And for the arms of the Troglodytes, those who bear the name Megabari have rounded shields, have covered the raw oxhide and club and iron knobs, but the rest of them have bows and arrows and lances. Again, the burial practiced by them differ entirely from others. So we're having these cultures that are kind of living in caves, and they have a very, very nomadic way of life. We're going deep in Ethiopia here. These are the last two quotes that I want to read, and we'll get what Garfield has to say once we understand everything in context after this particular passage. Okay, a very important passage, because this is what we have read. We have read what the Ethiopians have said for themselves, that they believe that they are a colony also sent out to Egypt. We also have read that all these beautiful things that are the most pious and the most beautiful and beloved by the gods. And we've also read eyewitness accounts by Diodorus on what he's witnessing when he's in those areas in deep Ethiopia in the south, looking at all these different tribes of Ethiopians that we've mentioned. And this is what he thinks of them. Again, not trying to pass this as derogatory, because you can get a little bit sensitive here for some. But we're just going to read the text because this is what we've been presenting in the sources. But there are also a great many of other tribes of the Ethiopians, some of them dwelling in land lying on both banks of the Nile, on the island, in the river, of the inhabiting neighboring country of Arabia, and still others residing in the interior of Libya. They're everywhere, these Aethiops. These are the airthopes that we're talking about here, guys. And there's nothing wrong with these people at all, guys. It's just how the reading of these texts. The majority of them, and especially those who dwell along the river, are black in color and have flat noses and woolly hair. So we know exactly who we're talking about when we're talking about the airthopes. Okay, guys. There's no. As for the spirit and the entirely savage, as for their spirit, they have entirely savage and display the nature of a wild beast. Not so much, however, in their temper as in their ways of living, for they are squalid all over their bodies. They keep their nails very long, like the wild beasts, and are as far removed as possible from human kindness to one another. And speaking as they're so desolate between each other. They're like so nomadic. And speaking as they do with a shrill voice and cultivating tone of the practice of uncivilized life, as they are found among the rest of mankind, they present a striking contrast when considered in the light of our own customs. So that's what Diodorus actually thinks about the people when he travels to Ethiopia. He is not amazed of the wonder and the splendor of these ancient ruins that he's seeing. But this is what we're reading, and this is what he's actually transmitting to us. Concerning the historians, we must distinguish among them to the fact that many have composed works on both Egypt and Ethiopia, of whom some have given credence to false report, and others have invented many tales out of their own minds for the delectation of their readers, and so may justly be distrusted. So he's saying, hey, all these sources we don't know where to trust them. There's false reports. He's what he thinks is the best of his ability. That's what he's going to tell us. For example, Gathicus of Sindus in his second book of his work in Asia, and the compiler of his geography, Timodorus of Ephesus in his eighth book, and certain others who come where in Egypt have recounted most of what I have set forth above, and are on the contrary accurate, and all they have written, since to bear witness ourselves, during the time of our visit to Egypt, we associated with many of its priests and conversed with not a few ambassadors from Ethiopia as well, who were then in Egypt. So there was also some Ethiopians that he also conversed with in Egypt. So he's just telling us he's got some information from Egypt, from some Egyptians, priests, I think he was saying, and he inquired from some ambassadors from Ethiopia and those historians we were talking about before. And after inquiring carefully with everything that was given to him, he presented of them about each matter and testing the stories of the historians and tried his best to test the stories. We have composed our account, his best account, so as to accord with opinions on which they most fully agree. So that's what he thinks. What most things are agreeance with what has been written above. He's giving you what he thinks about it. And I just want to finish on this, guys. The way that Diodorus has explained the airthopes, he also explains certain Europeans who live above Greece in exactly the same manner as beasts, as uncivilized, as uncultured, like beasts who are running around with erections because they haven't came out of their animal instinct yet. That's how they portray those people too. They kind of portrayed everyone around them that lived in the fringes as dweller-likes. In that time, to be honest though, people in Britain would be still swinging in trees and living in caves, just like what we find in Ethiopia in the account that we've just read, if that makes sense. It wasn't as civilized as it was in the cradle of the world, which is that the Aegean eastern area, from the kind of the Middle East to that Aegean area where Egypt is, where Crete is, where the fertile valley is, that cradle right there. Anything beyond the fringes of those, basically, the Greeks looked at as the way we kind of described the airthopes, and the accounts like I described for Europeans like that as well, just so it didn't sound a little bit as I was trying to push some negativity in that particular passage. And I guess that's everything I have in regards to Diodorus and the Ethiopics. And what I wanted to show was, just if I allow me to finish for 2 seconds, I wanted to show that the verse, when we look at the verse, how people just cherry pick it and put it in context like that, and when we read Diodorus in context in his whole book, his preface, he's going to tell you, hey, we don't really know, but I'm going to go down and I'm going to talk to the different people from these different areas, and I'm going to get the best stories I can from the best sources I can get, and I'm going to tell you what these Egyptians are telling me. I'm going to tell you what these Ethiopians are telling me. I'm going to tell you what the Assyrians are going to tell me, and maybe when we get to Black Athena, we can kind of say what he has to say about the Greeks, because, and not only Diodorus, but many others, because I can also make Greek sound like, hey, they were the first people in the world, and so on, just like everyone tries to do as well. But I like to be sincere with my work and actually show you a bit of critique in that part as well. So yeah, I've kind of showed this passage, how it could be interpreted differently when looking at the whole thing in context, and I urge everyone to go read Diodorus for themselves. Yeah, Garfield, what do you got to say, mate?
One of the things when we're reviewing this information is very important. It's for folks to realize the ambiguity of the term Ethiopia. Well, there's another word I should use. It shouldn't be ambiguity, but it should, because it's used for several places. Ethiopians are referred to as a people. But in this Diodorus thing, he's using this as a toponym to refer to what we call Nubia today. And what happened is a lot of people reading this think he's talking about modern day Ethiopia when he's actually talking about Nubia. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. The second thing is, I notice whenever they're talking about Egypt and Ethiopia, they try their best to differentiate the stories of the culture. So you said this happened in so-called Ethiopia, this happened in so-called Egypt. Boom, 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 boom. And the stories, as you say, some of them you might give credence to it, but we really don't believe Osiris was the root to anything. But that's a part of the mythology, and that some people in Egypt may have thought Osiris was a real guy, and I'm sure people could bring proof of that. I've seen people debate that Osiris was a human first and he became a deity later on. We're not here to debate that. We're just saying that each culture have their own mythology, and they're going to teach their mythology and say, hey, we're the first, we're the ones that did this, and we gave it to all you other cultures.
And that's exactly right. And guess what the Greeks do when it's their turn? You know what I mean? They kind of give that kind of prestige to themselves. Do you know what I mean? It kind of, this kind of rhetoric was very consistent in that time, and all nations kind of want to do that, and it's even been seen today, right? We still do that today, don't we, Garfield?
Yep. We do it right now today, which is amazing that we're continuing a tradition that's been around for over 3,500 years.
But do you know what, Garfield? Even though if I wanted to, I could entertain these thoughts, and I can entertain these things, but we should look at them as literature and try to understand them in the particular context and time. And we shouldn't just pull out little things out of context, and because we can do that with anything, and it completely you completely pervert what the actual meaning. So context is important. And I think this particular passage, if now that you understand in context, you can understand that he's giving you three contradictory accounts, and he's not trying to mesh anything together. He's just telling you what the people, you know what I mean, are telling him. And yeah, it's very consistent with what was happening at that particular time. Yeah, very interesting. I thought this particular thing is. And anything else you got to say about Diodorus in that passage?
No. I think it's clear as day what he was trying to do, and for us to take it literal is let's go back to the original quote, the first quote. Let's scroll down a little bit. Oh, you know what? You have this up. So let's pause for a minute, family, while we change slides. So, yeah, this is the part that they hate in my community, man, because they say these mummies are in the Greco-Roman periods, and these are Greeks and Romans, so these are not true depictions of Egyptians. And hey, go ahead, man.
Yeah,
I'm going to have the tomato story at you right now.
Yeah, this is very interesting, guys. There's a few things I need to mention here, actually. These Egyptian mummy portraits, a lot of people I've been reading don't take these serious because it looks like these are just Romans and Greeks. I would like to know why they think that. It's what sources are they using to kind of make that point to say, hey, these are not Egyptians. All these people that we see here, these are all Greeks and all Romans. I'm really interested to understand how they come to that conclusion. But anyhow, I just want to go ahead and I'm going to show a few pictures. And really, Garfield, all I want to do is sit and speak about them. And I want you to tell me your thoughts. Now, I'm witnessing people who have woolly hair, curly hair, squiggly hair, ulotriches. Would you consider me being right, Garfield?
You are 100% correct.
Are these sub-Saharan African people, Garfield?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah, they're Egyptians.
Okay, they're Egyptians. Do you think they could be Greeks or Romans?
No. The one in the middle looked like Queen Elizabeth, though.
She does. I don't know how much of that picture's faded, to be honest, because I want to be realistic in these pictures. But yeah, I definitely see curly hair. So ulotriches, I would tick a yes when I look at these people and call them ulotriches, regardless if they're Egyptian, Greek, or Roman at this period. Okay, I would like to get the regalia of this young boy on the left. I would like to grant he could be Greek, Egyptian. He could be a Phoenician. I'm not sure. But the telling of his symbol on his hair that he's wearing is very Greek. And even though Greek was part of their traditions as well, some of these other portraits don't have that. We can use that as a distinctor. Maybe these people were actual Hellenes and not native Egyptians or Romans. Or we could say that this boy was an Egyptian boy, yet he's using Hellenistic or Hellenic clothes and regalia and stuff and jewelry and stuff. So yeah, definitely Melankros. He's definitely Melankros, that young boy. I would say he's Melankros. And I would definitely say his hair is ulotriches. Regardless if he's Greek, regardless if he's Egyptian, he's he's definitely not Ethiopian, guys. He's not sub-Saharan African. Neither of these people are. The biggest population of native Egyptians lived in the area of Egypt. They were much larger than the cultures that were in their control, such as the Romans and the Greeks. Absolutely, we know this for sure. We know that many Egyptian people, native Egyptians, we know that native Egyptians started speaking Greek, started writing Greek, changed their names if they hadn't already from their families previously, and started using their names in Greek. We know this. It's written over. So we know that native Egyptians did this kind of stuff. And these people here, regardless of what people think, these are the people that were there at the time, in Hellenistic times and Roman times. Maybe there was a tradition of this type of portrait in that time, in that area, and maybe the Greeks and Romans just continued this in their art. We haven't found anything like that, but I'm just saying, who knows? But at the moment, we have these pictures. And just to go through some others, again, we have some curly hair. We have a white lady. Usually white women were much lighter. I wanted to mention before the other woman and this woman here, we can see that they are much lighter, the women. Not all, but most of them were, because they were in-house. In Greek pottery, in Greek art, in Minoan art, even in Egyptian art, women are usually lighter than men, because men were outside. They were the ones doing the farming and all that kind of stuff, and outside doing all the heavy work, lifting. They're the ones that were getting melanated in their skins. So again, we have these curly-haired. Now, I like to look at these people because I know the Greek phenotype. I understand that this understanding of sunken eyes is a very Egyptian trait because we see it in Egyptians today. And some of these people that we see, especially the two there, I would like to consider that they were native Egyptians, but it's speculative at the moment. We're only speculating, let's be honest. I chose to put some darker pictures over here now, and for the rest of them. The darkest ones I can find. I wanted to find the darkest person so I can say, hey, this person here reminds me of an Aethops, that snub-nosed, woolly-haired, Athalis, burnt coal Athrax. Ethos, look, that's what I'm trying to find here. Now, I see here 3 people. Now, I see Ulotriches, curly hair. I see that they're melanated. Definitely, they're not. I don't see sub-Saharan Africans in these pictures, although I do see maybe partly a Mongol or Mongol or a half-breed, maybe in a lady. I don't know. She looks very Egyptian, but that hair also looks very kind of Ethiopian, like African style. Maybe not. Maybe it's squiggly. I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm just trying to get used to understand what I'm looking at here, guys. Definitely squiggly. The one on the right, geez, I don't think he looks Greek. He doesn't even look like a Roman. He definitely looks like a native Egyptian. If I was to think what a native Egyptian would look like, that representation for some reason kind of, I think, would be the majority. Even the one on the left, even the one in the middle. Let's say this is the majority of people that look like in Egypt. But look at them. They are not the same color as the Aethops, are they? And they're not the same color as those South Indians, are they? No, they are more color, like more similar in color, like those northern Indians, those Pakistanis, and perhaps like the native Egyptians, like in the other passage we're reading from Arrian, and we can see it beautifully represented here. So maybe these people are half-breeds and maybe not, but what we're seeing here is representations of not only how people look then, but also how people look even today in Egypt. Again, I like to take my position again that this person on the left here, wearing what he's wearing on his head, is perhaps Hellenic or Roman, maybe not. I don't know. But it's telling with what he's wearing on his head. These are the two I have no got much to say on these people. This is something that you still see in Egypt today, and I actually do believe, regardless of what people think, I actually believe that these people were there 2000 BC as well. Absolutely, among many other people, among the Aethops, among Greeks, among Phoenicians, among Levantines, among Assyrians and Persians and Greeks. Egypt was New York, baby. Do you know what I mean? Same thing, hodgepodge of nations. Look at these little 3 boys. I found these very interesting. Very interesting, these little 3 boys. I actually think they're all Egyptian, these little boys, native Egyptian. But again, we're only speculating here. I like to be the boy on the left doesn't look Greek. I understand what Greek looks like. Those sunken eyes, those big sunken eyes, those lips, the Zuramaya, the Ulotriches, black eyes, dark features, melanchros, little boy. Definitely native Egyptian, not Roman. His eyebrows are thick, very Egypto, Levantine maybe, maybe some type of Arab, who knows? But we are having pictures of someone who has curly hair, who is melanchros, not the melanchros like the Aethops, like we read Arrian, like the more of that melanated skin like the South Indians or the native Egyptians. There you go. This kid in the middle, he's got straight hair. Interesting. Half-breed, Greek, Roman. Those words, I'm not sure. Are they Greek? Are they Coptic? I didn't really think about it. That boy on the left, interestingly enough, I'm actually going to go as far as to say that this boy here is a native Egyptian. Maybe he's a half-breed, maybe not. The reason why I think this boy would be a native Egyptian is because he's got that side lock. He's got those hairs. He must be some type of priest, I would say. He's bald. Usually priests are bald in Egypt culture. You could be a Greek priest in Egypt. There was Greek priests in Egypt before Alexander the Great. I could find you sources. There was Greek priests. There was probably priests who were Aethops as well. So, I mean, many people know that even when I'm talking about these Aethops, we're talking about these Nubian, sub-Saharan African people. We know that they participated in Egyptian culture as well. I'm pretty sure Garfield knows that there was a time, 25th dynasty, guys. I don't know what. It's 2:20 in the morning. I can't remember which dynasty it was that the Aethops seized power. Maybe Garfield can come in and tell me and correct me right now. So there's been different nations that have.
You're correct. The 25th dynasty. You're correct. The Taharka, Tabaka, Shibitko, all of them, Pi, all of them.
So look, we're not saying that the sub-Saharan African people have no history in Egypt. Not at all. Of course they do. Absolutely. They were the next door neighbors. You know what I mean? Crete is a next door neighbor. Phoenicia, the area of Palestine, is a next door neighbor. Everyone needs to know that where Palestine is down the bottom, where it meets Egypt, according to the old maps, there is no Suez Canal. Interesting enough, when you read Suez backwards, it's Zeus Canal. That's another story for another time. But the Suez Canal, the Suez Canal is something that's been trenched out now. There's no access. But before then, there was a path in that area. There were people living in that path. Let's call nowhere land. It's not Egypt. It's not Levant. It's right in that corner, and people lived there. And these people lived there would have been half-breeds, would have been mongrels, would have been the same thing that was going on between Egypt and in the confines of Egypt and Ethiopia. There would have been this mixture. This mixture of culture that was happening in this region, people have been going in and out of that corridor for years. So people have been going, Ethiopians have been going up, Greeks have been going down, Egyptians have been going. People move around. But the boy over here, guys, on the right, definitely a half caste, maybe not. He's got an Egyptian type pendant, it looks like. He's side lock. He looks like Tomba priest. Definitely a native Egyptian, because he's dressed as such. If I can make that example. Again, I wanted to show a depiction between someone that's white and someone that's dark, or if I can say someone that's black, because we can call that guy black, can we not? Like, I don't know, white and black, because we're using two extremes, but I'm just going to use this language for now, because people think when we use the word black, we just mean like sub-Saharan African black. But we gave the point in another presentation, or in this presentation, that black can also mean, like my wife uses it, who's a Maori. She's whiter than me, but I'll say something to her and she goes, because I'm black. She's whiter than me. So the way we're understanding white and black, if we apply it here, we have a guy that's a melanchros, who's got ulotrichus. I would say that's woolly, curly hair on top of his head. He doesn't look sub-Saharan African. The guy on the right looks like an Egyptian priest, believe it or not. He looks like an Egyptian priest, but not only does he look like an Egyptian priest because he's bald and shaven head, but he's the whitest person that I've seen, yet he looks like he's bald. I'm thinking because he was of that nature. I don't think he was losing his hair. I think, had shaved off everything because it's part of their culture, their religion, to shave off all hair. So what now I'm suggesting is that you have someone who seems to be an Egyptian priest, speculative, but he's white, someone that seems to be black or dark, and as Zguramaya Ulotriches, but he's not actually sub-Saharan African. But we can use those words that all sources in Greek use for that guy on the left. Can we not? Because we can, guys. He hasn't got a snub nose. He's not an Aethops. I think that presentation of that particular part is finished. I kind of want to go back for 1 second and understand that when we use terms today, Garfield, if you can kind of try to understand what I'm going to say now. When we say someone today who is tall, dark, and handsome,
Mm-hmm.
Am I negating that it's are we always negating that it's a black African?
Well, I used to think that way. When we hear tall, dark, and handsome, we think about an African, somebody from the African continent or a descendant.
Right. So you used to think you actually used to think like that. But interestingly enough, that someone who is tall, dark, and handsome could be used even today for someone who is perhaps a James Bond, Sean Connery type kind of person, because it's even reflected in some type of advertisement back in the 70s and 80s. But the point I wanted to get is that just to end on this note was that being tall, dark, and handsome doesn't necessarily mean someone is African, or it could actually mean someone who's actually dark, some type of dark person who's been melanating in his skin, and his skin has been so dark, and he's tall and perhaps handsome. And it's a very common kind of language that we use all day. But even today, sometimes when we think of tall, dark, and handsome, it's sort of the stereotype that women are talking about black, but not necessarily, because we've seen it over the years in different types of things, men who are tall, dark, and handsome. And even if I type in Google right now, tall, dark, handsome man, I guarantee you it will show you a variety of colors. But I'm not going to do that. But I think we have kind of finished our presentation. I wanted to end off a couple of these things that I've placed on this last slide. It was just, I was trying to summarize everything that we we're going to be talking about, but I couldn't. I didn't have enough time to finish it and the space to put it. But perhaps we need to do another video, or perhaps we can end this one and start our next one sometime in the future. But as for me, Garfield, I'm all done with my presentation tonight. And if you have anything to say or any questions before we finish up.
Let me applaud you for doing a very good job. A lot of folks going to be upset with the fire mummies, because in my community, they feel like those mummies are a representation of the Greco-Roman period, and those people are not true Egyptians. But it's funny how you show the description of what they're saying. Curly hair, they have dark, and that's the description that
it fits the description. Absolutely,
it fit the description. So
yes, let's not look at these pictures, and let's not try to see what's not there and try to put extra technicalities when it's not there. Let's just read them for what it is, beautiful literature, and go from there. And honestly, guys, I've done everything tonight trying to be as pseudo as less as possible. I've tried to be as truthful and trying to use words that I'm trying to articulate in a way that I'm coming across as true as I can be with everything I've said tonight. And if there is anything in regards to any of my presentation tonight, I would really like to hear what people have got to say, because I want to be challenged. Because even though I don't have a run in this particular race, Garfield, this is your thing. This is your thing. You're the one that's challenging this African American people because it's your community and your people, right? But when it comes to the Greeks, I have a horse in that race, because now we've got the African community to trying to say, hey, we're stealing all your culture now. So and that's where we're going to go later, and that's why I would really want to go to that perhaps in another presentation. But yeah, Garfield, that's what I'm getting at, bro. Like, we kind of need to go ahead and show people that once you read everything in context and don't cherry pick everything, and actually try to be more as truthful as possible, as rigorous as possible, as truthful as possible, you can actually come to something that's more truth. And that's what we want to get to. We want to get to truth. We don't want to get to pseudo stuff.
Yeah. As far as questions pushing back on what you're saying, so if the Egyptians, basically based off the Greeks, would be people who are pretty much like a honey skin tone, and some of them could be light skin. But that's basically what we see the spectrum. The consensus right now is that they stem from all the way to light. They could be and have different phenotypes. So I
absolutely,
think
you can't just like those
one type. You can't say that. Mm-hmm.
No, definitely not. Look, it's also good to actually think that perhaps we should stop looking at the Egyptians as a race. Let's look at them as a culture. I believe that Egypt is not a race. It's actually a culture of people, a hogwash of people that came together in that area, that have taken things that probably pre-existed before them in that area, who knows, things that existed around them, and developed this type of culture that we call Egyptian today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying, hey, that's something to think about, guys, because we know that what we're finding in Egypt is consistent with that. It's kind of like a spectrum all over the place. So absolutely, yeah, guys, I think we did a really good at kind of trying to go ahead and put things as true as possible, guys, with all the sources and the way I'm reading them. And really, guys, this whole presentation was just on this melanchrois word. I really wanted people to understand the word, how it's applied in Greek, how we can use it for objects and clouds and dark rains. I really wanted people to understand who we refer to the Ethiopians and who the Greeks referred as the Ethiopians. I want people to understand when that dark is also a spectrum, and how melanchrois fits more with the word dark than it does with the word black, because black is an absolute word and it's not a word that has a spectrum the way dark does, because spectrum is that melanchrois is that spectrum of darkness like we see in Egypt. So definitely they are melanchrois. I've showed you how the Phoenicians or the Greeks can also build melanchrois by showing Zeno as an example. I could show you we could even say that example in the Bible is coming from a Hebrew who are consistent with being a Levantine or Canaanite type of people, who are they're also being called as a dark or black or Milanese. So yeah, guys, I think we did a fair enough job. And guys, I could spend another hour. I actually had so many more sources, and there's actually so many sources that we didn't actually go to tonight. But with those sources, guys, that we didn't go tonight, this is what I want you guys to take out with it, is that the way that I've described to you guys what melanchrois is throughout this whole presentation, take that in considerate and use it and apply it on every source. And once you do that, you'll see that not all of them are void, because it all comes down to that word, which I think I've done a vigorous job at explaining of where this word comes from, how its roots are, what some of these roots are, and its etymology and so on.
All right. Hey, I want to say thank you, man, for spending. It's now 2:30 in Australia in the morning. I want to say thank you for staying up. Tell your wife I said thank you, and your family I said thank you. All right. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop the recording, and we're out.